how does a 7 or 8-year-old little girl with unending curiosity satisfy that curiosity when she is in public, sitting with her parents in a darkened auditorium, watching a talent show, yet not understanding a thing that's going on stage? That remains to be answered. As a child, I was raised in Northwest Ohio in a mid-sized town we will call Midtown Ohio. My parents attended St. Flavibus Parish, name changed to protect the innocent. They sent us children to the St. Flavibus Associated Parochial School, grades K through 8. We absolutely loved it. I have many, many good memories. That church and school are still standing and thriving today. My parents were very, very involved. My dad at one point was a longtime usher. My mom was the president of the Rosary Altar Society. They socialized with other parents who were like-minded, who sent their kids to the school. I think you get the picture. Now, when I was no more than 2nd or 3rd grade, my mother said to me, "We are taking you to the family parish talent night on Sunday." I couldn't wait. I love variety shows, anything that had to do with acting, music, theater. I was ready to go. Now, before I explain to you what was going on stage that baffled me so much, I need to paint a brief character sketch of one of the individuals who was involved in the talent program. My parents were acquaintances with a couple called the Flendowskis, Mr. and Mrs. Flendowski, name changed. Mr. Flendowski was very involved in church activities. Mrs. Flendowski was in many ways an ordinary mom of a kid that went to the parish. She volunteered. You could see her supervising on the playground. You could see her every now and then opening little cartons of milk for little first graders who had not yet mastered the skill during lunch. She was in the huge parish choir, but what made her truly different from everyone else, at least in her own mind, is that she was the only trained singer in the choir. She was a classically trained operatic soprano. This meant that she received 95% of all the sacred church solos at Christmas, Easter, Lent, what have you. Now, from my little 8-year-old and even younger perspective, I always thought that Mrs. Flendowski sort of saw herself as a celebrity for this reason, the big time soloist of the parish. I always, again, I didn't have the vocabulary to express this back then as a little kid, but as I would observe people interacting, I always thought that Mrs. Flendowski saw herself in her tall, statuesque manner as someone who deigned, as a celebrity, a very nice celebrity, who deigned to talk to the common folk of the parish, who deigned to talk to the peasants, the plebeians, the little workmen in her path. Of course, she was very nice. Now, why am I speaking this way? Because this is how Mrs. Flendowski talked. In fact, I got the impression that she thought she was actually doing us a favor by talking to us. Now, why do I really get this impression? Well, because when I would watch other parents talk, it was more of an ordinary, "Hey, how's it going, Jack? Hey, Bill, your kid did great at the football game. See you at the party, Mary. Yeah, you look great in that blouse. Yeah, see you later." Whereas with Mrs. Flendowski, it would be, "How was your weekend, Mary? Oh, that's so nice to hear. I heard your children did so well at the football game, Jack. Oh, so nice to see you. Yes, we'll see you next week." At any rate, back to the family talent night. There I was sitting in the auditorium. I was seated here. My mother was to the right of me. To the right of her was my father. I don't remember my siblings attended. I just know it was very dark. There was a huge, huge curtain in front of us. We saw the things that you would normally see in a talent show: juggling acts, people singing duets, trios, etc. The curtain shut. I was anxiously anticipating, what's next? Who's coming on next? As the huge velvet curtain shut and the lights blackened out, I became aware suddenly of this exotic bongo music. Kung, 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 kung. As the lights slowly rose, kung, kung, kung. It was pretty dark, but I could make out a lone figure, a silhouette of a lone person on the stage. Kung, kung. The lights got lighter and lighter, and we could slowly see that it was a person sitting on a step stool with his or her back to us. kung, 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 kung. Then I could clearly see that it was some sort of a female. The brass section slowly entered. Bing, 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 gong, 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 gong. And then suddenly, this person I could tell clearly was wearing a leopard skin print dress, skin tight, backless all the way down to no shoulders, but I still couldn't tell who it was. And then slowly, as the music was about to start, I saw this person turn at a 3/4 diagonal mysterious pose. Still couldn't tell for the life of me who it was, as even though I was really trying. And just as the trumpets started to enter, right before the trumpet goes, "Pew," this lady turns around and starts to sing, "Pung, kung, 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 whatever Lola wants, Lola gets." It was Mrs. Flendowski, the lunchroom lady, the sacred choir solo music lady. Lola wants, Lola gets, etc., etc. Now, as a little 8-year-old girl, I was looking on stage thinking, there's a lot going on up here that I do not understand. Why are the lights so dark? Why is Mrs. Flendowski dressed like a jungle animal? Why does she have extra lipstick smeared on her lower lip? She also had a huge tear all the way up her leg. And I remember thinking, why didn't someone tell her before she walked on stage that her dress was ripped? They could have given her a blanket or something to put on her. I felt kind of bad for her. There was just so much environmental stimuli to decipher. But one thing that I did notice immediately, my little eyes honed in on the fact that her shoulders were bare. And it was during the fall. I remember the leaves distinctly falling as we walked into the auditorium. It was probably October or November. So who did I ask? The expert. I turned towards my mother, tapped her on the shoulder. I said, Mommy, why are Mrs. Flendowski's shoulders bare, Mommy? Isn't she cold, Mommy? It's cold outside. Everyone else has a jacket or a sweater on. No response from my mother. She just stoically stared ahead. Now, something you need to know about my mother is that she was a very, very dignified, regal woman in public, that is. She never would acknowledge us when we were at church. We were not allowed to talk to her when we were at church. We could not acknowledge her when we were at the theater. That was the law. Only, for example, if we were being carried away on a stretcher and the EMT tapped her on the shoulder in church and said, "Excuse me, ma'am, your child is coding. We're taking her to the hospital." Only then would she notice us. She didn't answer. And I thought, okay, I don't need to know why she's not wearing a jacket, even though it's cold outside, but I can still figure this out. So I just kind of looked on stage and I thought, now, why is she wearing that leopard skin print dress? What? I just don't understand that. I turned towards my mother and this time whispered a little bit louder, Mommy, why is Mrs. Flendowski dressed like a leopard? Why does she have the black spots and orange? Mommy, I don't understand. Mommy. Of course, still no word from my mother, who remained stone-faced. But she did do one very quick gesture whereby if you blinked, you would have missed it. She did one of these quick, shh. That's all I got. Okay, fine. I can still figure this song out. I will focus on the words, but the song just seemed to go on for days. There weren't a whole lot of clues. Lola gets. And I thought, I'm sitting there in my chair, whatever Lola wants, Lola gets. Whatever Lola wants, Lola gets. Is this a riddle? No. Is this a limerick? I remember in 2nd and 3rd grade, we learned about limericks. No. How about a haiku? Is it one of those poems? No. I just can't figure this out. I just have to ask my mother one more time. This time I tapped her on the shoulder even more persistently. And although it was still a whisper, because we were taught to only whisper in public, well, at things like that, it was technically a very, very hoarse whisper. As Mrs. Flendowski continued to sing, whatever Lola wants. Finally, I tapped my mother on the shoulder desperately and said, Mommy, what does Lola want? What does Lola want, Mommy? Well, By this time, she was furious. She was completely peeved, completely perturbed. She whirled around, and of course, everyone could hear in front of us. You don't need to know right now. You don't need to know. And I remember when she said, you don't need to know, I remember it just like resounded in the caverns of my mind. You don't need to know. I thought, why not? Why can't I know? I remember just sitting dejectedly back in my chair. Now, if you think that this might have evolved into a conversation in the car on the way home about the birds and bees or how we got here, no such conversation ensued that night. As for the fate of Mrs. Flendowski, 2 years later, when I was in 5th grade, she appeared as the Reverend Mother in The Sound of Music. I was not qualified as a little 5th grader to critique her voice, but I can assure you it was highly, highly dramatic. As for the fate of the family parish talent night, I don't really recall there ever being another family parish talent night after that day. And I would know because my parents took us to everything, all the festivals, all the musicals, everything. And I really didn't think about that until just a couple weeks ago. Did someone call in to complain? Did they complain about Mrs. Flendowski or Lola, whoever she considered herself to be? I do not know. But I do have one regret, and that is that somehow within the great warp of transcendent time, that each of you couldn't have been sitting there with me in that darkened auditorium that night. Perhaps one of you could have explained to me what Lola wanted. Your Honor,